Continuing our data analysis power hour, we're still talking about summarizing data, and we're now ready to discuss measures of spread. Remember that the measures of center answered the question, what is the mediumest number in the list? The measures of spread answer a completely different question, which is how spread out are the numbers in the list? The reason that's important is because you might have two lists of numbers that have similar averages, but one of them would be much more concentrated in the middle. So this gives us more information about the data. So there are two important measures of spread that are used on the GRE, and they're called the range and the standard deviation. The range is very simple. Its meaning is the difference between the largest and smallest values in the list. So its calculation is simply max minus min. And its visual interpretation is the width of the entire graph. So if we looked at this data here, if the data went from this minimum to that maximum, we would simply subtract those numbers. If it went from a minimum of 10 to a maximum of 40, then the range would be 40 minus 10, which is 30. Notice that the word range is kind of similar to the word mid-range. So I want you to stop and think about that and be aware that there are two words that sound similar but have very different meanings. The mid-range is a measure of center. It's a point in the middle of the number line. The range is a measure of spread. It's the width of the whole graph. The other important measure of spread is called the standard deviation. This one is a little bit more bizarre to those of you who may not have seen it before, or even some of you who have. It is another measure of spread. In this case, it doesn't measure the width of the entire graph, but of an important part of it. Its meaning is essentially the average plus or minus distance from the center of the graph. How do you calculate the standard deviation? Don't worry about it, because on the GRE, you'll never have to. Its visual interpretation is the half width of the heart of the graph. So what I've represented here is I've cut out what I call the heart of this distribution, which is basically the most important part in the middle. This is where most of the data lies. Now, if we measure half of that width, not the whole width, but the half from the center to the edge, that is more or less what standard deviation means. So you can see that typical numbers in this list will be at the mean plus or minus the standard deviation. So let's just quiz ourselves on the concepts here. If most, not all, but most GRE students are 25 plus or minus 4 years old, then that would basically mean that 25 is the number in the middle, and this width is 4. So 25 would be the approximate mean, and 4 is the approximate standard deviation. If all the students in a class are between 19 and 32, then the range is, well, then the range would be your 32 minus 19. The range would be 13. Which one probably has a larger standard deviation? Would it be A, the ages of people at Disneyland, or B, the ages of people at the trendiest nightclub? And you might even assume that they have a very similar mean. Maybe they both have an average of like 28 or so. But this goes to show you why we need both a measure of center and a measure of spread in order to characterize data. So what do you think? Which one do you think would have a larger standard deviation? I think the most likely answer is A, the ages of people at Disneyland. Why is that? The ages of people at Disneyland are very spread out. If you think about ages on this axis, well, you'd have some people who are babies They have ages of 1, 2, and 3. And then you would have some people who are like their great-grandparents, people over here who are 80. Very spread out. At the trendiest nightclub, then you would expect basically young adults to be at the nightclub. Maybe most of them would be from like 21 to 41 or something like that. And, you know, whatever the exact numbers would be, I'm sure some of them would be under 21, but whatever. But for the most part, young adults would be much more concentrated towards the middle of the graph than at Disneyland, where we would have much more extreme young ages and more extreme old ages. So I guess that's kind of easy to visualize if we say this this is the nightclub focused towards the middle, and this is Disneyland much more spread out across the whole number line.